And now to Syria, where a war monitoring organization says Syrian opposition fighters have surrounded the city of Hama on 3 sides. Their advance comes despite a counter-offensive launched by government forces. The rebels have already taken Syria's second-largest city, Aleppo. The government and its Russian ally have responded with airstrikes. Hama is only 200 kilometers away from the capital, Damascus, and one of the flashpoints of the country's civil war. Let's look at how the conflict got to this point.
A new wave of violence is exploding in Syria. The front lines of the war had been frozen since 2020, leaving President Assad as the de facto victor. But now the conflict is threatening to reignite in a world that has changed. Some are questioning the strength of his position and whether he's capable of defeating the rebels. Assad has maintained an iron grip on power since taking over from his father after his death in 2000. In 2011, during the Arab Spring, he crushed pro-democracy protests, stifling opposition for years to come. Throughout the course of the civil war that followed, he showed himself willing to use brutal force on his own population. He allegedly carried out a chemical weapons attack in 2013 that killed more than 200 people, including children, on a part of Damascus held by rebels, something he has consistently denied. But by any measure, Assad has presided over a catastrophe in Syria. Under his watch, an estimated 500,000 people have been killed in the war, and millions more either forced to flee or displaced. And despite the propaganda, more than half of Syrian people are facing food shortages, and the economy is in free fall. Yet, he retains the support of parts of the population, especially minority groups such as Alawites and Christians, who see his secularism as a bastion against the extremists vying to take over the country. He has also derived strength from his international allies, Iran, its proxies the militant group Hezbollah, and Russia. All have played a pivotal role in keeping him in power and securing military victories. But all of these actors are now distracted or weakened in some way, making it unclear if Assad will be able to count on the same level of assistance in future. Some also point out that the ease with which the rebels were able to advance could mean the Syrian army is not as strong as Assad would like, and could also add to his vulnerability and determine the future of his regime.
Well, DW reporter Ghazi Ohanes joins us now, who was born in Aleppo and is following this story for us. Ghazi, we are hearing reports from the Reuters news agency that Syrian rebels say they have entered Hama city. What more do you know?
Yes, Gerard, indeed. The rebels are now saying they have entered Hama city, they've breached the city, and that there is fierce fighting going on at the moment in the city. So this fighting is mainly in the Al-Arba'in neighborhood that is northeast of Hama city, but it's within the city borders. So there's intense fighting going on and things are changing very fast on the battlefield right now as we speak.
Now, Assad's government started a counteroffensive to push back the rebels. How is that going?
Yeah, so now the counteroffensive is focused on Hama. Assad has deployed helicopters there. The Russian army, I'm hearing also from opposition radio, that is now bombing the Al-Arba'in neighborhood, which is where the fighting is going on. So if rebels advance further into Hama, I'm assuming there's going to be more reinforcements, especially air reinforcements there to strike. But so far, it seems that the counteroffensive is not holding up the way that the regime would like to. You mentioned in the report that there's been a lot of withdrawals. Well, the regime forces just north of Hama city have also withdrawn. This is what rebels are saying right now. They're just released a video on their Telegram channel saying it appears to show that some army soldiers are also withdrawing from there. So it's hard to say how much of a grip Assad has on his army right now with what we're seeing on the ground.
Now, what does all that mean for Assad? Will he be able to defend his rule over Syria?
So Hama is extremely significant for Assad, for the government, because in 2015, it was Russia's first cooperation with the Syrian government that was in Hama and Homs mainly, where they started striking. That's how significant it is for them. So they're not going to give up without a fight. But if rebels do breach Hama, their next goal is going to be Homs. And if they manage to capture Homs, then they could effectively cut off Damascus from Assad's loyalist base on the Syrian coast in Latakia. So Assad would not be able to defend his own people there. And also, it would connect the Syrian opposition in the north all the way in Idlib to Hamas. So it would be catastrophic for the Syrian government. Now, Assad has spent years trying to portray himself, him and his father. We saw that they've ruled Syria together for over 5 decades. So they've tried to give this image of this might that cannot be defeated. Well, what we're seeing on the ground now shows quite the opposite of that, doesn't it? Mm. So it's a wait and see situation to see if it will hold up.
Now, according to the UN, around 150,000 civilians have been displaced in this latest flare-up. Where can people actually go and find safety?
Safety is hard to find in Syria at the moment. Now, a lot of people have evacuated to certain areas that have been deemed safe for now. I've heard of some evacuations to the Latakia province. I've heard of some evacuations to the Raqqa, which is Kurdish-controlled, or Kurds that have evacuated from Aleppo. But it's hard to say how long those areas themselves are going to stay safe, right? The situation is changing so fast on the ground, and there's immense needs. Syria, before this offensive, already had a massive displacement crisis, one of the biggest in the world. Also an internal displacement of 7 million people. So this only adds to that catastrophe, and it's hard to say who's going to help meet the needs of all these people.
DW reporter Gazia Ohanes there reporting. Thank you, Gazia.
Well, let's pick up that point with Dr. Simon Mabon, who lectures in international relations at Lancaster University in the UK. He's an expert on the Middle East, political violence and political Islam. Welcome back to DW, Simon. What does the speed of the rebels' advance tell us about the state of Assad's forces?
Well, I think it raises a number of questions about their inner workings, about their sense of loyalty to Bashar al-Assad, and about the extent to which the Syrian armed forces are able to rely on the backers that have propped them up so much over the past decade or so. I think there's a lot going on. I think the speed of it has caught many by surprise. But the speed of it is not just coming out of a vacuum. It's not just something that appeared overnight. There have been moves, maneuverings, planning, of course, amongst the HTS rebels and others that have sought to capitalize on a perceived weakening of the Syrian armed forces and to capitalize on the shifting geopolitical contours, be it with regard to Israel's bombardment of Hezbollah targets in Lebanon, Israeli targets of Syrian targets in Syria itself, or indeed Russia's preoccupation with everything happening in Ukraine. Right. So it's opportunistic and it's rapid, but it certainly raises a lot of questions.
And help us to understand more who these rebel groups are and who's arming them, because they're seeking to unseat a tyrant, but that doesn't necessarily make them the good guys, if I can use those simplistic terms.
Yeah, I mean, it is very, very simplistic to say, well, Assad is bad because he's killed over 500,000 people and displaced 11 million people through the fighting. So the rebels must be the good guys. But these rebels have got long-standing ties to Al-Qaeda, to Daesh, although recently the leader, Jolani, has sought to distance himself from Daesh. He's been fighting against them in some instances. He's sought to distance himself from the transnational jihadism of Al-Qaeda and trying to articulate a more Salafi vision of territorially bounded political Islam. And so that raises serious questions about their relationships with groups that have been at the central in the war on terror, let's say. But it also raises questions about how HTS, the Jalani organization, and indeed others will engage with other groups in Syria, other minorities, other Muslims who don't necessarily adhere to the same vision of political Islam that Jolani and HTS are articulating. So there's, again, more questions. In terms of funding and financial assistance, of course, the suggestion is that it's Turkey and Qatar that are the ones responsible for this. But Qatar has been trying to distance itself from this. It's rejected this on a number of occasions. And Turkey is worried about what would happen if this uncertainty indeed pushes more Syrians into Turkey, more refugees, more demographic imbalance within Turkey. So again, there's question marks. Again, there's uncertainty. We don't know the granularity of what's happening right now.
Assad getting support from Russian air cover at the moment. How long can he rely on support from Russia and Iran, who, as we heard in the report, have problems of their own at the moment?
Yeah, well, Iran has been dramatically weakened by everything that's happened over the past year or so. And we know that that Assad was able to retain his position as president of Syria to essentially create a sort of an end game in the Syrian civil war, if you will, with the help of Iran, with the help of Hezbollah, who were fighting on the ground with him, with his armed forces, and with Russia. Now, Hezbollah has been preoccupied and decimated by Israel. Iran has been preoccupied by everything that's been happening, has been weakened by Israel. Russia has been hit very, very hard with sanctions. So the Syrian state, of course. And the ongoing fighting in Ukraine has shifted the Kremlin's focus slightly. But it does not want to lose its position of influence in the Middle East. It does not want to see Assad fall. And I would also argue that the Gulf states do not want to see Assad fall either. They've been normalizing relations with Assad, which is a very dramatic shift from how things were a decade ago, or indeed longer, when the uprisings began in Syria in 2011 and the fighting broke out. So it's a different landscape. And I don't think many actually want to see Assad fall, aside from the rebels and aside from the millions of Syrians who've been suffering under his rule.